It ran without a laugh track, without a studio audience, with a camera that looked directly at you, and a family so spectacularly dysfunctional that somehow they felt like home. Malcolm in the Middle premiered on Fox in 2000, pioneered the single-camera sitcom format that would define American comedy for the next 2 decades, and launched one of the most successful child acting careers of its generation. And then it ended in 2006, and the people who made it went in directions nobody watching could have predicted. One became Walter White, one became a NASCAR driver, one walked away entirely and went to Harvard. And one of the brothers had to sit in a courtroom in 2023 and watch his real-life sibling sentenced to 30 years in prison. Here's the real story of the Malcolm in the Middle cast, 26 years later. Number 1. Justin Berfield as Reese Wilkerson, the one who left acting and never looked back. He was the impulsive one, the brother who was gleefully violent, spectacularly dumb, and secretly a culinary genius, a detail the show treated with the specific deadpan affection that made Malcolm in the Middle work. Justin Berfield played Reese for all 7 seasons and was consistently one of the funniest things in every episode he was in. But here's where it gets really interesting, because when Malcolm in the Middle ended, Justin Berfield walked away from acting almost entirely. He co-founded a television and film production company called Virgin Produced and moved to the other side of the camera. No dramatic exit, no public explanation. He came back for the 2026 revival, played Reese one more time, and afterward posted on Instagram, "We're so lucky that we got to come back to these characters after 20 years. I had so much fun. Now it's back to carpools and diapers." Reese Wilkerson never needed anyone to tell him what he was good at. Justin Berfield turned out to be exactly that, a man who figured out what he wanted and went and did it, without ceremony. But while Justin Berfield's exit from Hollywood was quiet and entirely on his own terms, his co-star Christopher Masterson's years after the show were defined by something no amount of distance from the camera could make easier, because his brother's crimes would become one of the most reported stories in Hollywood. Number 2. Christopher Masterson as Francis Wilkerson, the brother who carried what he didn't choose. He was the oldest, the one who had been sent to military school before the show even started, the rebel who spent 7 seasons causing chaos from a distance and somehow always managing to get away with it. Christopher Masterson played Francis with charm and timing, and made every scene he was in feel looser and more alive. But suddenly, something happened that had nothing to do with Malcolm in the Middle, because Christopher Masterson's brother, Danny Masterson of That 70s Show, was convicted in 2023 of raping 2 women and sentenced to 30 years to life in prison. Christopher was in the courtroom at the sentencing. He had been publicly supportive of his brother throughout the trial. Whatever he carried in that courtroom, loyalty, grief, conflict, he has never spoken about publicly. After the show, Christopher Masterson had largely stepped back from acting, building a career as a DJ. He came back for the 2026 Hulu revival and reprised Francis. He is married to actress Yolanda Pecoraro and has a daughter. Francis Wilkerson spent 7 seasons running away from his family and always finding his way back. Christopher Masterson's real life turned out to be more complicated, and the parts that were hardest are the ones he has chosen not to explain. But the most quietly extraordinary post-show story in the Malcolm in the Middle family belongs to the boy who played the youngest brother, because Erik Per Sullivan simply stopped, turned around, and went somewhere nobody expected. Number 3. Erik Per Sullivan as Dewey Wilkerson, the one who simply left. He was the quiet one, the artistic one, the youngest brother who seemed to be living in a slightly different world, drawing his own cartoons, marching to his own rhythm. Erik Per Sullivan played Dewey for all 7 seasons, from age 9 to 16, and he was extraordinary at it, the kind of child actor who made everything look effortless. But here's where it gets really interesting, because when Malcolm in the Middle ended in 2006, Erik Per Sullivan simply stopped. No announcement, no pivot to film, no reality television. He appeared in one more project in 2010 and then walked away entirely. Bryan Cranston revealed in 2026 what Sullivan had actually been doing. He had been accepted to Harvard University and was getting his master's degree. When Cranston called to invite him back for the revival, Sullivan said warmly that he was delighted for them and had absolutely no interest in returning. Oh God, no. he reportedly said. "I haven't acted since I was 9 or something." Dewey Wilkerson lived in his own world and didn't particularly care what anyone else thought of it. Erik Per Sullivan turned out to be exactly that, and simply went and built a different life on his own terms, without looking back. Stories like this don't make the headlines anymore. That's why we tell them here. If that matters to you, subscribe. We're here every week. But the story of the Wilkerson children is only half the picture, because the woman who played their mother spent 7 years being nominated for the same award, never winning it, and then found something in real life that her career had never quite given her. Number 4. Jane Kaczmarek as Lois Wilkerson, the woman they nominated 7 times and never crowned. She was the force of nature at the center of the whole operation. Lois Wilkerson, the mother who ran the household like a military campaign, loved her children with a ferocity that occasionally terrified them, and delivered every line at a pace and volume that made every scene feel like controlled detonation. Jane Kaczmarek played her for all 7 seasons and earned 7 consecutive Emmy nominations for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Comedy Series. She never won. 7 nominations, 0 wins. But there is more, because after Malcolm in the Middle ended, Jane Kaczmarek's 6-year marriage to actor Bradley Whitford ended in divorce in 2009. She continued working steadily guest roles, The Big Bang Theory, This Is Us. And then, in March 2026, just weeks before the revival premiered, she married her high school sweetheart, Rusty Long, after decades apart. She was 68 years old. In 2026, Jane Kaczmarek returned as Lois for the revival and is joining the cast of Netflix's The Burrows, produced by the Duffer Brothers. Lois Wilkerson held everything together by sheer force of will. Jane Kaczmarek turned out to be exactly that. A woman who kept showing up, kept being extraordinary, and eventually found her way back to where she started. But while Jane Kaczmarek found something unexpectedly personal after the show, Frankie Muniz spent the years building a life that was stranger and more physical, and more deliberately un-Hollywood than anyone watching Malcolm in the Middle could have imagined. Number 5. Frankie Muniz as Malcolm Wilkerson, the kid who forgot and the man who came back. He was the center of everything. The genius who broke the fourth wall every episode to tell you exactly what was wrong with his life and made you feel, somehow, that your own chaos was perfectly normal by comparison. Frankie Muniz played Malcolm for 7 seasons, from age 14 to 20, and he was the reason the show worked. But you know what's even crazier? When the show ended in 2006, Muniz walked away from Hollywood and started racing cars professionally, not as a hobby, as a career. By 2026, he was running full seasons in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. In 2017, he mentioned on Dancing with the Stars that he had no memory of much of his childhood, of Malcolm in the Middle, of the years that had made him famous. The story grew. By the time it circulated fully, people were saying he had amnesia. In April 2026, he addressed it directly. "I have a bad memory. It's not like I have amnesia." He attributed it to 9 concussions from racing and a lifetime of training himself to move on the moment each scene was done. He returned for the 2026 revival. "It felt like home," he said. In 2026, Frankie Muniz is 40 years old, married, with a son, racing full-time. Malcolm Wilkerson spent 7 seasons convinced his life was unfair. Frankie Muniz spent the 20 years after the show, proving that life was exactly as big as you were willing to make it. But the most remarkable second act in the Malcolm in the Middle family belongs to the man who spent 7 years playing an endearing disaster of a father, and then became one of the greatest dramatic actors in the history of American, before deciding it was time to stop. Number 6. Bryan Cranston as Hal Wilkerson, the man who broke bad and then said goodbye. He was the most lovable disaster on television. Hal Wilkerson, the well-meaning, perpetually overwhelmed father who loved his wife with a ferocity that bordered on unhinged and navigated every crisis with the specific energy of a man who was absolutely certain he was handling it. Bryan Cranston played him for 7 seasons and earned 3 Emmy nominations that almost nobody outside the industry noticed. But here's where it gets really interesting, because in 2008, 2 years after Malcolm in the Middle ended, Bryan Cranston was cast as Walter White in Breaking Bad. And everything changed. 4 Emmy Awards, a Peabody Award, a Guinness World Record, Tony Awards, an Olivier Award, Broadway, the West End. And then, In an interview with British GQ, he announced that in 2026, the year he turned 70, he was going to pause. He would move to France with his wife Robin, who had spent 25 years adjusting her life to his. "She deserves it," he said. "I want to level that out." He made one final commitment before the pause, the Malcolm in the Middle revival. He came back as Hal one last time. The show debuted with 8.1 million global views in its first weekend. And then Bryan Cranston went to France. In 2026, he is 70 years old. Hal Wilkerson was a man who loved his family more than he understood himself. Bryan Cranston turned out to be the same a man who gave everything to his work for decades, and then decided, quietly and without apology, that it was someone else's turn. Malcolm in the Middle was a show about a family that couldn't quite function and couldn't quite fall apart either. It changed the grammar of the American sitcom. No laugh track, no tidy lessons. Just a spectacularly messy family held together by something that looked less like love and more like stubbornness and felt somehow more real for it. The people who made it went on to win Emmys and Tonys and NASCAR championships and Harvard degrees. One of them came back for the revival 20 years later. One of them didn't. One of them walked into a courtroom in 2023 and sat beside his family for the worst reason imaginable. And one of them is somewhere in France right now, not reading scripts, drinking wine with new friends, and probably fine with that. There is only one original Malcolm in the Middle, and now you know what really happened to the family that made it.